Build that slow though. Okay. Ready? I'm just gonna wing it. Welcome back, guys, for the third part of our series where we're gonna take everything that we just learned about the ingredients and we'll work it through the brew house and see how we actually create the final product. Okay, so whilst we go through this part of this series, I want you guys to remember that we've been brewing beer as humanity for a very, very long time. So if we really simplify the process and compare it to, say, doing it on your stovetop bench at home, we'll talk about how it all works from there. So the first part of the process for us is we've got this control panel, where basically we can see the different tanks that make up the brew house. We've got some temperature control, and then we've got the flow of our wort. So I can control what valve opens, what valve closes, and I can direct the flow of the wort from tank to tank. So what you can't see from up here is downstairs we've got a mill. So basically our brewers are pouring those big bags of grain into the mill, and the mill is gently breaking open the husk of the barley. At that point, it gets carried upstairs and it waits in here in this conical shaped vessel. This is the grist case, and that's where all the grain is. Once we start brewing, we drop all of the milled grain, the grist, into the mash tun. The mash tun is basically like a supersized batch of porridge. So you've got all this hot water, you've got the cracked open grain, and you're churning it up, and what happens is those sugars will dissolve into the water, making a really sweet, almost like honey on bread like flavor, again depending on what malt we've used. But the sugars, the natural sugars, are dissolving into the wort. Yeah, that's pretty much that bit. Cool, so we've got this huge porridge-like consistency over here in the mash tun, and then we shoot it over here into our lauter tun. This is basically a separation vessel. So how it works is it's got a false bottom, or like a grate, and we recirculate the wort over top and I'm gonna top and then back out through the bottom and then over top again. And what it's doing is it's creating a natural filter bed of the grain, and the wort is becoming clarified. Most importantly, we're separating that spent grain out from our clarified liquid wort. That spent grain then gets picked up by this local legend. His name's Ace. Ace has been with us since day dot. He's a cattle farmer, so he comes and collects this spent grain and takes it home to his cows to supplement their grass-fed diet. Really easy way and win-win for us and Ace and the cows. Yeah, so now at this point we've got clarified, filtered wort that we're going to pump over into the next vessel. So in the kettle, a lot of really important things are happening. So we've pumped over our clarified wort. First and foremost, we've got to boil that because we've got to sterilize it. We definitely don't want any weird bacteria heading over into our brew. So we sterilize it. This is also the first point at which we can add our hops. So I might just grab this bowl as reference. So usually we'll put some hops in here. And if, let's say we're going to boil for an hour, if I pour those hops in at the start of boil, they're going to cook down through those essential oils into the alpha acids that create that bitterness, yeah? But so that'll be my first hop addition. And then later on, when the boil's almost done, I might add hops again, which won't get to that point of bitterness, but they will release that beautiful essential oils which give us the flavor and aroma of our beer. The third thing that's happening in the kettle is any proteins that are left over from the malt will actually begin to coagulate, kind of like a poached egg, and then we can filter that out in the next tank. So we're here, and then we're shooting over here into the whirlpool. Now, very important part of the whirlpool. If you're able to see this bloody pipe, the wort will pump in through this pipe here, which as soon as it hits the side of the vessel, it actually begins to whirlpool. So that's what this vessel's called, the whirlpool. And basically, it's another filtration vessel. So just like when you stir a cup of loose tea leaves and the tea leaves gravitate towards the center, the same thing's going to happen with all of those hop solids that we just put in there that doesn't dissolve, as well as the coagulated proteins. So it's another filtration vessel to kind of clump everything together and filter it out. So to recap, we added the grain, we filtered it out, we added the hops, we boiled, we sterilized, we're filtering it out. We've got balanced, great wort that we're then going to pump over towards the fermenters. so that we can add the yeast, but it's super, super hot and we don't want to add yeast to boiling hot wort. So we've got to pass it through a heat exchange on the way to the fermentation vessel to allow the wort to cool down. You got the shot? Yeah? Okay, I'm not sure about the practicality of this ladder, but it was here and Pete thought it was a good idea to sit on the ladder. So once everything's sweet and cool down, then you pump it over into one of your fermentation vessels, unlock one of these bad boys, open it up, and this is where you'd pitch in your yeast. So you'd pour your yeast off this tiny little ladder into the top, shut the lid, and let fermentation begin. Oh wait, what? Let's talk about that.
Yeah.
Cool. You pour in the yeast, blah, blah, blah. Let's talk about that down in the cellar. Where are we? Okay, so that brewing process, basically we can do, that'll get covered in about 6 hours. And then we do a few back-to-back brews so that we can fill one of these big fermenters. We've added the yeast, and then before one of our brewers will knock off for the day, at that point, he or she will do a gravity sample. Now, gravity measures the amount of sugar that is in your wort. And it does so by basically a refractometer, and it bends light. No, fuck that. I'm gonna start it over. It's too much. It's too much. Before knocking off for the day, one of our brewers will do a gravity sample, which will measure how much fermentable sugar is still in our wort. And at that point, it'll track quite high, yeah? Malt is full of sugar. Cool. When the brewer rocks up the next day, he or she will do another gravity sample, and it's going to start to see that sugar quantity is declining. At the same time, carbon dioxide and ethanol is building. So what we'll see over the next 3 or 4 or 5 days is that the sugar will decline, and then we'll do a reading, and then it'll start to plateau. When it plateaus, that's when the brewer knows that basically the yeast has consumed all that there is to consume in terms of fermentable sugars. At that point, we'll crash cool the tank so that the yeast will fall asleep. And then we'll let it kind of mature for another, depending if it's an ale or a lager, another 10 days or maybe another 4 weeks. Again, what happens is our lager yeast is already settled here at the bottom whilst it's fermenting, and our ale yeast has been floating at the top. But when we crash cool the tanks to hover around 0, that's a cold environment that neither one of the yeasts prefer. So it'll actually settle and sink through the entirety of the beer to come and collect on the bottom. Our beers are unfiltered, so what that means is that the yeast actually settles through all of the beer in the case of an ale. That's why our ales are always very cloudy and quite hazy, whereas your lager, because the yeast cloud's been at the bottom the whole time, tends to still be quite clear, and yeah, clear, super clear. I'm gonna say that again. Whereas the lager, because the yeast has been at the bottom of the tank the whole time, actually still remains quite bright and quite clear. So after a couple of weeks maturation time and the beer is ready to go, all we then need to decide is whether we're going to put it into kegs, into bottles, or into cans. At this site in Byron, it's predominantly into kegs, otherwise it's straight to our serving tank at the tasting room. But up at Mulwillumbah, we either pack it into bottles or into cans, and then it makes its beautiful way into your loving, drinkable arms. Drinkable arms. Here in Byron, mostly everything will go into kegs. Otherwise, it'll go straight to the tasting room bar for direct service. So let's go up to the bar and have a little knock off, shall we? So it's all like natural. I'm just kidding. Well guys, that pretty much wraps it up. Thanks so much for coming on a virtual brewery tour with me. I really, really can't wait to welcome you all into our tasting room soon. So take care and we'll see you very soon. Cheers. It's coming out my nose.